Hey guys, I'm Saurav, and in this video, let's talk about mastering your DSLR. Now, you might have just got a DSLR, or you are a beginner, or you're thinking to buy a DSLR and you want to master your camera. This video is for you guys. So without wasting any time, let's get started. The first thing that we're talking about is the camera modes. Now, your DSLR camera have different camera modes. There are some camera modes which help you to decide what aperture, shutter speed and ISO should you keep. Now, you have auto mode where your camera decides everything. Now, when you're shooting in auto mode, you will get good images, but you won't get the best images that your camera can shoot. So you actually have to come out of the auto mode. I won't suggest using manual mode as a beginner because it can be a bit overwhelming to adjust the shutter speed, aperture, ISO, all the three things at the same time. So I would actually suggest you to use aperture priority mode. So in aperture priority mode, you only have to adjust the aperture and the shutter speed will be taken care by the camera. And personally, I feel aperture is a very easy concept to understand. So once you understand what aperture is, then according to the aperture, you can use the aperture priority mode and get better images than you used to while you're shooting in auto mode. Now you have shutter priority, you have manual mode as well. So once you actually learn what aperture is, then learn what shutter speed is. Again, ISO is relatively simpler to learn. So once you learn all the three things, then it's just a matter of practice and you will be good to go with the manual mode. And once you have mastered the manual mode, you will get the best images that your camera can produce. So these were the modes related to the exposure. Now you also have modes on how you take the images. Meaning, you have single mode, you have continuous mode, also known as the burst mode, you have a timer. So basically, this decides how you're going to take the images. Now, as the name suggests, obviously the single mode will be helpful when you want to take a single shot. Or when you're photographing some action, wildlife, sports, the continuous or the burst mode is going to be helpful where you're going to take a series of images continuously to freeze or to get the perfect moment. So make sure you're using the camera modes as per the situations and you are not afraid to explore the modes that your camera provides. The next thing we are talking about is the focusing modes. Now you have composed your subject, you have the story in your mind, but if the subject is not in focus, what's the use of taking an image? So when you're using the autofocus in your camera, the job of the camera is to guess the subject and to focus on that subject. So basically you have different autofocusing modes in your camera. Let's talk about single autofocus point. Now the names might differ according to the camera manufacturer, but the job or the concept is the same. Now when you're using single autofocus, basically you're using it to shoot stationary subjects. So when your subject is stationary, you basically use the single autofocus, you focus on the subject and you take the image. That's it, pretty simple, right? But when the subject starts moving, maybe you're shooting some action, some sports or some birds, you actually have the subject continuously moving. So you have to track that subject continuously, and for that you're going to use the continuous autofocus, okay? So in continuous autofocus, the camera's job is to continuously track the subject as it is moving. So make sure, depending on your subject, whether it's stationary or moving, you use the autofocusing mode. Now the question is, how many focus points should I use? Now maybe your camera can offer tons of focusing points. Doesn't mean you have to use those focusing points each and every time. When you have a stationary subject, I always prefer to use a single focus point because I decide what is the subject and where exactly I want to focus on. But on the other hand, when you have multiple focus points spread throughout your viewfinder, your camera is actually guessing the subject to be in focus, and most of the times it might do a good job, but sometimes it might also focus on something else and you don't want that to happen, right? So make sure you are actually using the focusing modes very wisely. If you have subjects moving throughout the frame, use the multiple focus points, or if you don't have them, use the single focus point. To get the best precision, use the center focus point and then focus on the subject, and then you recompose the shot and you will be sure that your subject is sharp and in focus. So make sure you're wisely using the focusing modes to always nail the focus. The next thing we are talking about is using the light meter and the histogram. So light meter will be very helpful when you're shooting in manual mode. your live view or your viewfinder is not going to give you the actual representation of the exposure that you're capturing. Your light meter is going to be the best tool to decide whether you're shooting underexposed images or overexposed images, or you're shooting a perfect exposure. So using the light meter is going to be very helpful. Once you know how to use the manual mode and you combine that with the light meter, you will be finding clicking images in manual mode very easy and very convenient. You will get perfect exposures 100% of the time if you wisely use the light meter. And then once you take the images, again, to judge the exposure, don't use the live view or the screen that your camera provides. Because if you're shooting in direct sunlight, you might think that the images are underexposed. Because when you're shooting in direct sunlight, the screen won't be bright enough. And you might think that you're shooting a darker image. But you're not shooting actually a darker image. So at that time, histogram is going to be your best friend, which is going to give you the actual representation of the exposure you have captured. No matter whether you're shooting in direct sunlight or dark, the histogram is going to be the same, right, for all the images. So basically, try and view the histogram and learn how the histogram works to judge the exposure, and then you can fine-tune your adjustments to capture the best exposure at that particular moment. The next thing we are talking about is the file types. Now basically, your DSLR camera can shoot two types of files. One is the JPEG and second is the RAW. Now, JPEGs are great. You shoot an image, you have great colors, great contrast. But if you want the most details and if you want the best quality, RAW is the way to go. I have always focused on this. Why should you shoot in RAW? I always shoot in RAW because I like to edit my RAW images and like to tune the details as per my liking. You don't have that flexibility while you're shooting JPEGs. If you want to deliver the images quickly to your clients, JPEG might be a good option. In the beginning, I would prefer to actually shoot JPEG plus RAW because that will give you best of both the worlds. If you're not confident in shooting RAW images, you always have the JPEG files with you. But once you're confident editing RAW images, try to shoot only in RAW because shooting JPEG and RAW will actually allow you to shoot less images in your memory card because you're shooting 2 images at a time. So make sure you learn how to edit the RAW images. Initially, it might be a bit difficult and a bit time consuming, but as you practice, it becomes a lot easier and a fun process, right? So make sure you're shooting in RAW, edit your RAW images and get the best quality that your camera can shoot. The next is actually not a tip to how to master your DSLR, but a very useful tip to actually use your SD cards. So when you shoot an image and you find the image is not that good, then don't delete the images directly from the camera. It is not good for the SD card. You don't want your SD cards to get corrupted, okay? So whenever you want to delete some images, always connect your SD card to your computer or laptop and then you delete the images. But if you want to format your SD card, I would not suggest you to do that via a computer or a machine. I would actually suggest formatting an SD card directly from the camera. So make sure you're deleting your images from the computer or the laptop and formatting the memory card through the camera. This will actually ensure that your SD cards are not getting corrupted quickly and you don't want that to happen, right? So I hope these tips were helpful and now you actually are more confident using a DSLR. If you have any more questions, you can feel free to leave them in the comments below. If you really liked the video, press the like button. If you loved it, press the subscribe button if you haven't already. I will talk to you guys in the next one. Bye.